G'day guys, Rick here from Perth Bullion Exchange, perthbullion.com.au, and we thought we'd do a little bit of a follow-up video in a way, and just I sort of wanted to, a few people asked us what was happening with the price, what we thought might happen. So, and it sort of follows on from the interest rate video that we did earlier. If you haven't watched that one, you might go and check that out. And just about, so we wanted to give some price predictions for, I suppose year end, and we'll just precursor that with it's not financial advice, and I don't know any better than anyone else. Anyone who says exactly where the prices are going to end up is probably lying to you. So I'm just going to give my opinion, and I'm going to pick a number out of the air basically that I think it might end up at, and you might have your own number in mind, but I'm just going to give a few of the reasons why I think it might get there. Or might not get as far as what some other people think. And then you can sort of take some of that reasoning, I guess, and just consider it for yourself and maybe some of the logic behind it, or maybe do some reading and you might come to a better conclusion yourself with additional information that I didn't have when I made this conclusion. So we'll kick off with gold because I feel like, as most people know, that's probably the main driver in the precious metals realm. So gold for me, as most people might know, depending on how much you've gone down the rabbit hole, it's typically conversely tied to the US dollar. With that said, obviously in Australia we're stacking, so we're talking in Australian terms. So I'll cross on both currencies, but I think with the new rate cutting cycle that's coming through in the US, it's sort of been pretty well meteorised. I think, and I'm just going to work on year's end and then maybe, give a few comments about where it might go after that. So I think by year end, I think it's very likely that we will be sitting, between 2.6, if I had to put a number, I'd say 2.650 US in gold. And I think, and I don't know exactly when the tipping point will be, but I think that will conversely mean, obviously at the moment, that's probably going to mean somewhere around 3,950 or somewhere around there. And some people, that might mean 4,000. It could do, but I think there's a very strong possibility that as we roll into the end of the year and the US dollar weakens and we see that surge in gold price, the Aussie dollar is probably going to strengthen a bit. Two reasons for that. I think the RBA has come out and said that they're probably a little bit more cautious on moving forward with rate cuts. They're most likely going to leave them on hold for a fair while longer, so that'll strengthen the Aussie dollar as the US falls against all other currencies, including, in talking about gold in a currency at this point. But I think also seasonal strength in the iron ore market typically kicks off at back end of September. So from September through to Christmas, as a lead up, because a lot of the steel mills in China will restock in preparation for the Lunar New Year, and they're at all-time lows for their stock levels currently. I'm not sure if it's all-time lows, don't quote me on that, but it's significantly lower than this time of year typically. So, and I know iron ore is completely off on another topic, but the Aussie dollar strength is really tied to the strength of the iron ore industry and the resources sector. So a surging iron ore price, and I don't think we're going to see crazy highs again that we have seen in the recent years, but a surging price there is going to strengthen the Aussie dollar in the short term, at least, I think, coming into the back end of the year. That coupled with the Aussie not cutting rates, we're probably going to see a strengthening Aussie dollar. So I think that whilst the direct conversion for what I'm talking about in US dollar terms might be 4,000 Australian, I think more likely that'll be muted. So I think whilst it could definitely go to 4,000, I think you're probably going to see it struggle to get much over that 3.9 mark before year end. And it could happen a little bit earlier, but I think just to forward project a little bit, I think post that restocking season in the iron ore, we're going to see some softening of the dollar as the iron ore price comes off, of the Aussie dollar, I should say. And then once the market is certain, as we get more data, once the market's certain that the RBA is going to cut rates, they they factor in the rate cuts before they actually happen. So when they start to do that, we're going to see some decline in the Aussie dollar. And then what I'd be hoping to see is, further out into next year, maybe February, March, you might see a 2,800 US term, but we might see, 4,500 Aussie dollar, because that Aussie dollar is going to come off significantly. So that increase of a couple of hundred in US terms might actually translate to 500 or 600 Aussie terms because of the weakening dollar. And I think that whilst I'd like to see that happen sooner rather than later, I think that that's probably going to push through to December at the very least, and then it'll probably roll through into early next year before that really kicks in a gear. Conversely, with that, with silver, the same sort of holds true if you take all of that discussion around, the interest rates and what that might mean for our precious metals prices in gold. You can apply all of that to silver, so I won't repeat it all. But with silver, I think at the moment, with the ratio as high as it is, I think as that gold starts to really move, I think that ratio, like we've seen not too long ago, I think by year end, I think that ratio is definitely under 80, and I think it's probably closer to 75. So, I couldn't even do the math there on the spot, but I'd say you're probably talking, 30, I think it works out, just doing math in my head here, you're probably talking 36 US year end. But again, that translated into Aussie terms might be 54 now, but I think you're probably talking, I think we're going to struggle. 50 is definitely on the cards, but I think if it does break 50, we're probably going to be significant resistance once we get over that $50 mark. So I think probably between 50 and 52 by year end, and I think that's been reasonably optimistic on the ratio. And then I think as we move into next year with silver, as that price continues to accelerate, especially in Aussie dollar terms, I think that gold-silver ratio is going to continue to fall. So I think in the early parts of next year, we could see that ratio get under 70. And with what I think gold might do by then, I think there's a reasonable case, and I'm not saying with any level of certainty around that, it's all just probabilities, but I think there's a reasonable case that by, that March time next year, that, $60 Australian or $70 Australian silver is possible. I'd like it to come true, but I think there's still a reasonable case that some of those things are muted, because if you get a restricted gold price, not as good as what we're talking about earlier, or the ratio doesn't come back, then, that might only be a $55 an ounce silver. But I think 70 is definitely the top end for early next year. I think if I had to put a number on it, I would say probably low to mid 50s. I would say 54 to 58 is where I'd hope it to be early next year. And I think probably, very low 50s, if not very high 40s for year end. I think 49 to 51 is pretty practical. And I know some people in the comments, some people often say like, oh, it's going to the moon or $100 or something similar. But I think for me, those things it's almost wishful thinking. And I think there's definitely a case for it, but just as much as there's a case for it, there's often cases against it. And whilst we're all silver and gold bulls, you sort of have to weigh those two ideas and go, this is what I believe, but you can only believe at 60 or 70% certainty, and then you have to weigh that against the opposite case that you think might have a 10 or 20% chance coming true, and then sort of mute your expectations a little bit. I think it's the only way to be practical about forward-looking when you're talking about price. I won't get too much into platinum. I think platinum, for me, whilst it's obviously undervalued, it's at a historical low versus gold and silver and things like that. I just personally, I don't know enough about some of the industrial driving factors, and I think it's a little more complex than some people probably make it out to be. And if that's your niche and you're very heavily into it, then you can obviously make calls. But to me, I think platinum, unless I see something that's of significance to the market for platinum, I think you're probably going to get some small growth when it drags up, because obviously the decline in the dollar and the decline in the value of the currency is going to drag all hard assets up. But I think it's going to be very muted. I'd love for platinum to be, I think a positive outcome for platinum would be, plus 15, about 1550 by, talking Australian terms, by year end. I think that would be a really good sign for platinum. I actually have no idea whether or not it will get there. I think it's just as likely to play the game that it's already playing and just sort of hover around that 1500 mark in Aussie terms. I think moving into next year, as that fiat sort of crisis starts to really kick up a notch and we've got this accelerated rate cutting around the world, I think that'll drive platinum up, but I think at a lower rate than what it will other metals that are more traditionally held as security. So I don't think it's going to keep up with gold. I think although that might be a historical low now, I think at least for the short to medium term, I think it's probably going to go lower on that ratio, unless there's some sort of black swan event that sort of climaxes the platinum price to move up. And also same with silver. I don't see a really strong case for platinum to outperform either of those metals. And I think the reasons why gold and silver will go up will inevitably drag up platinum as well, but I just don't think to the same magnitude as the other two metals. So just my opinion. Obviously, it's good. I've got platinum myself. I do like platinum. I do like the fact that it's undervalued against gold and silver. And I'm reasonably hopeful that at some point it will catch up and be a big winner. But I couldn't hang my hat and say too much about what I think the price is going to do in the short to medium term, because to be perfectly honest, I haven't delved enough into it to really look at supply shortages and things like that. And because it's such an industrial metal, I think using the same analysis that you use for precious metals like gold specifically, but then also silver being investment and industrial use, don't really cross over to platinum. And I think for platinum, for me personally, if I was going to go very heavy in platinum, I would be going down a big rabbit hole on industrial demand dynamics and what's happening in that market and what supply is coming online and all that sort of thing. And I think unless you're willing to do that, I'd be reluctant to commit a big portion of my investment in precious metals to platinum. I think it's nice to have a little bit because you don't want to miss that jump if it does manage to catch up. But I would play it a bit more safe with platinum personally, unless you've done your own research and you're really confident on what you've read or seen. I think that's about it. By all means, if you've got an idea of where you think the precious metals might be going, drop a comment below. We hope you enjoyed the video. It's only our opinion and we're not trying to push a narrative. It's just what I think might happen. And it's why we're in the precious metals industry at this time. It felt like, something was brewing, and I feel like that's sort of progressed over the time. We've been getting set up for over 12 months before we opened. So through that period, I feel like the narrative sort of progressed as it was sort of looked like it would. So we're really bullish on it. That's why we got into the industry at the time we did. And I think if you've got your own predictions, chuck them below. By all means, ask any questions you want, and we'll do our best to answer them. But otherwise, we'll see you all next week with another educational video.